So a friend of mine recently asked me to do an Odyssey review, and I immediately thought, you mean I can talk about Troy for like 20 minutes? Yes, please. Let's do that. But in all honesty, having seen the Odyssey recently at IMAX and sat in a recliner and just had my socks blown off, I thought this is a good chance to reappraise Troy, which I must confess, it's a film I saw in the cinema. It was a really magical experience for me. I didn't have the critical perspective of someone who knew what bad dialogue might sound like. And I think the Odyssey has some weaknesses too, by the way. They bear comparison, right? The Odyssey is the Odyssey. Troy is the Iliad, released in 2004 on the back of the success of Lord of the Rings, borrowed a lot. It was interestingly due to be directed by Nolan. He was attached when Wolfgang Peterson walked away a month before they shot, which is pretty unprofessional. They gave it to Nolan, the story goes, and then Wolfgang comes back. And I guess the consolation to Nolan was that he would get a crack at Batman, which led to very interesting results. I heard someone say he dodged a bullet by avoiding the Troy script that was written by David Bainoff, who co-wrote Game of Thrones. I think it's a really good film in a lot of ways, not all. They're both very big budget. The Odyssey's, it's got this production hype that Troy had a bit of as well because of its budget. I feel like James Cameron has been usurped with the production hype blockbuster by Nolan. Everybody talking about how it's being shot, how difficult it is to make, how much of a risk this kind of production is. The fact that they shot it exclusively on IMAX cameras, I don't think it benefited the entire way. As for Troy, it was an introduction for me to the sword and sandal genre and also to Greek heroes besides Hercules.
I happen to be a hero.
All right, so one of the themes these movies share is leadership. We spend a lot of time in the Odyssey watching Matt Damon's Odysseus confront the outcome of his choices. And as the film goes along, he's asked to carry some, you could call them informational burdens. The value of the characters in Troy is reflected in their leadership. Achilles is a character who doesn't exactly have management skills, but leads by example and is able to inspire his men.
Do you know what's there? Waiting beyond that beach. Immortality! Take it! It's yours!
Hector is this noble leader who, to be honest, when coming to this with the writing, always seems to know what's going to happen, which is a bit of a Deus Ex Machina, but whatever. You know, we see Agamemnon and Troy's leadership being pretty uninspiring, lots of grape eating and wine drinking.
Do not mock the gods.
Faith is another theme they share. Priam has this blind faith in the gods. The gods seem to be quite vacant in Troy, and the gods are very much not vacant in the Odyssey. Although I heard an interesting theory that it's like a bit of a bad trip, and while Odysseus is just smashing lotuses, half of that stuff's sort of exaggerated memories. Although all his men are dead, so maybe they're just drowned. I don't know if it's like us reviewing history this way or if it comes through in the texts, which I haven't read, sorry. But the characters all have a distinct relationship with faith and religion. Also, I think Troy is kind of special in terms of this focus on legacy, which is at the center of Achilles' decision-making, and he's at the center of the film. They decided to put this guy at the center and make him quite unlikable, which I think is a respectable risk.
That's why no one will remember your name.
One theme Troy is pushing that Odyssey ain't is love. I think that's what lends Troy to feel kind of Shakespearean, not in the dialogue, we'll come to that, but in the motivation of the characters and how their arcs develop and how they make choices. The love that Odysseus has for his family in the Odyssey, I didn't really feel that as much. It almost felt like a duty as a father and a husband to return rather than a passion. So Nolan has opted for a more contemporary telling, this version of the Odyssey being based on Emily Wilson's translation. This isn't for everybody, but I do think it's an interesting choice. It's kind of funny because Emily Wilson rather ungenerously talked about how much she disliked the film, and I think she was focusing on the prose. And I don't think Nolan's writing of dialogue is a strength of his. I think his characters often sound intelligent, but they have this lack of emotional depth, which kind of matches the cold feeling of the world sometimes. With Troy, the writing is quite hammy in places, but it does give actors like Brian Cox a chance to really turn it up. The focus in Troy is the gods, whereas in Nolan's Odyssey, there's a focus on Zeus's law. Troy is more character-driven in terms of the plot. Achilles decides whether he goes or not. He decides not to fight. It's almost like a sports movie in some ways. The deaths in Troy landed more emotionally than the deaths in the Odyssey. You know, that when that bloke's swimming away to the sirens, it was surreal and it was sad, but it was nothing like Patroclus getting his throat cut. The characters revealing how they feel in the Odyssey is much more modern and much more subtle. I suppose it is more subtle because there's no Michael Caine to tell us exactly what's happening. And there are moments in Troy where the characters just right on the nose what you're supposed to be thinking.
You know I don't want to fight. I want to see my son grow tall.
Let's talk about the performances. And we might as well start with Orlando Bloom. Good old Orlando. I think he's the third billing on Troy. It goes Brad Pitt, Eric Bana, Orlando Bloom. His star power was strong, right? Return of the King come out the year before. He is so bad. He is so bad. There's a moment where it looks like he's following a laser pointer on the opposite wall. I think he gets better throughout the film, which now that I think about it, like maybe it's a sign of an actor who doesn't prepare, you know? So they come in a bit cold and then they sort of warm up towards the end. There is a scene with him and Eric Bana on a boat, and Eric Bana's trying to wrench a performance out of him, and you're just thinking, it can't be done. It can't be done. Then there's a moment with Peter O'Toole, and he gives him a named sword. Again, it feels a little borrowed from Lord of the Rings, but it seems to work a lot better for Orlando for whatever reason. Brad Pitt he's looking good. This is why you put him in this kind of costume, you know? Show off those legs and arms. Whenever someone talks about a really physical performance, it's usually not a particularly artistic one.
But I've never been in better shape than I was for this movie.
And his accent travels a little bit, but I think he's very compelling as a anti-hero. Eric Bana, for me, he's good. He's just so likable, you know? You get introduced to Achilles and you're like, oh, this guy's a bit of a dick. He's horrible to this little kid. And then you meet Hector and you're like, oh, I think I want Hector to win. He's protecting his brother. He's a family man, doesn't cheat on his missus when Menelaus is trying to, hook him up. Yeah, they sort of wrong foot you and then you're going for Hector and then you don't get what you want, do you? When it comes to the casting for both of these films, I would say Troy's more of an ensemble, but they both got to pick pretty much whoever they wanted. They had some heavy hitters and some up and comers. Like I think Rose Byrne is really good in Troy, the best of the women certainly. It helps that her character's got a bit more going on, got her own opinions and stuff, isn't just bait or a trophy. Okay, so I'm talking about Troy too much. For the Odyssey, I think Matt Damon's portrayal of Odysseus is like solid. Matt Damon does a good job of coming across as very intelligent, but he's not. I was expecting a little bit more warmth and a little bit more humor, maybe. Some of the guile and resourcefulness associated with that character. Sean Bean's Odysseus is almost more wily in the small amount of screen time that he has.
You have your sword. I have my tricks. We play with the toys that God give us.
Tom Holland is excellent. Telemachus and Odysseus are the only two characters that really have arcs, so they get to show a bit more range. I think Anne Hathaway's great. Her tone is the same in a lot of scenes, which I think is hard to like connect with an audience. Robert Pattinson is always good. His little tongue. There's a moment when he drinks from a cup of wine and he doesn't really spit it out, but he lets a bit of wine drip off his tongue, and it's so evil. It's brilliant. Great choice. Matt Damon is like a 80% strength Odysseus. You know what I mean? Like, I won't say Diet Coke. That's a bit harsh. But you might say to me, well, Josh, if you're so smart, who would you cast? You know?
Who is he?
You can't use Russell Crowe anymore because he's too old. And you're right. Russell Crowe is irreplaceable. So you got to be clever, funny, charming, resourceful, and in your 40s, maybe something like that. Male. And I actually think Chris Pine, I think he's got it in him. You know, like for those of you who've seen Dungeons and Dragons, you know what I mean? That's a bit closer to, and Star Trek, you put them together. Back to Troy, Brian Cox, he's having so much fun. It's great to watch him, you know, when he's like, then every son of Troy
Shall die.
Brendan Gleeson is good. He's like a little bit Irish at times, like more Irish than I think he was supposed to be. Diane Kruger is like mixed, you know, when she's acting against Orlando, what are you supposed to do? Peter O'Toole, who's famous for Lawrence of Arabia, he's really good. He brings a lot. I was really impressed with him. Now, I know you might think, yeah, well, they just piled loads of talent in to like mask weaknesses. But you can try that and it doesn't always work. I mean, look at Cats. They pumped a lot of famous people into that. Not all of them were actors. And yes, there will be a Cats reference in every video. Right, let's talk about the absolute strength of the Odyssey, the cinematography. A lot has been made of the fact that this was entirely shot on IMAX. And I know I talked about that being a bit of a James Cameron hype thing, but I went to see Avatar in 3D and it didn't look anywhere near as good as this. The water scenes in particular were so epic. The scale is given by the landscape, whereas I think the scale in Troy is the set design, the number of extras. It's almost like an old school kind of a movie where they have big casts and big days. It's much more traditional in its, you know, movements. And it's got these weird, like a zoom in on a character. I found that it's almost like it slightly makes you laugh. I don't know what the goal was with those. There's a really cool moment though, and I wish there was more of this, where Paris fights Menelaus. All the audio cuts out. You just hear his breathing and it's this in-helmet shot. That's super immersive and creates really good tension. I think Nolan's tension is an absolute strength of his as well. Pair that with the score and you're sweating, waiting for the outcomes of some of these events. All right, let's talk about the score. Ludwig Göransson doing the Odyssey, and Troy was done by James Horner, who also did Titanic. They are opposite approaches, right? James Horner went with a traditional orchestral, kind of like a biblical epic score that at times does a lot of heavy lifting. It's got a little bit of a hint of Star Wars in there as well, which young me probably really enjoyed. And Ludwig's instruments that have had a lot of talk, making up these instruments and banging old pots together and whatnot, it resulted in this really unsettling yet immersive score that really added to the dreamlike atmosphere. Troy's it gets it right and wrong. It's getting it right when the hero on screen is doing something in character or heroic. It's doing it wrong when it's a little too loud or it's staying around for a little bit too long. One of the interesting things for me was like it sets Achilles as the villain in a similar way that the Greeks' armor being darker in both films kind of treats them like the baddies. But I do think the setting of the Odyssey feels a bit colder than the Mediterranean holiday that is Troy. Really interesting, the difference between the walls of Troy. I know Troy is barely in the Odyssey. This decision to go in a different direction, make it feel smaller and like maybe more realistic in some sense. You know, these places, they weren't huge. Just how much skin there is in Troy is quite funny. Everyone's a little bit glamorous. Like it's a little bit too L'Oreal in some moments. Troy's world feels very populated. The sets, they're almost like a Ridley Scott. You know, he's known for having these really, really busy, eventful sets. And the scene where they're entering Troy with Helen, and there's petals coming out of the woodwork absolutely everywhere. The emptiness of the Odyssey is a little surprising to me. Ithaca didn't feel like a kingdom, you know, it felt like an outpost, felt like a village maybe, you know, where the giants live. They're just chilling in a forest. There's no giant furniture. I don't know. We've got to commend whoever it was who designed Agamemnon's armor. Just look at that thing. It's so alien but ancient at the same time. It's super curious and evocative, and I can see exactly why you would put that at the center of your promotions. Nolan's got this thing with trailers. His trailers make you go, what is that? Oh, I want to see that. Okay, horse chapter. Let's talk ponies. We've got Battle of Troy condensed to about 2 weeks. And the Odyssey, we got this horse that they half bury in the sand. Really cool way to do it, especially the in the horse stuff. That seemed absolutely grim. Kind of reminds you of some sort of like World War I trench experience. The horse in Troy looks like it's made out of driftwood and stuff, so maybe it was made in a hurry. It's cool though, and the scene when they come out of it is really cool. In both films, when they're dragging the horse along and you get to see it from all angles in the Odyssey, that's really cool, the amount of people they have doing that. I gotta say though, the head on that horse is so perfect. It looks like it was carved by Michelangelo. I know it's a weird hangout, but whatever. The way they did Hades in the Odyssey is very cool. That dude coming out of the sand like, you should buy a lotto ticket. Creepy. Really good. The scene with the Cyclops, you could see Saturn eating his son, which is like such a disturbing painting. I really like the scene involving Cersei. Excellent performance by Samantha Morton. She's so good. It reminded me of Spirited Away, you know, when her parents get real greedy and eat all the food that's just laying around. The effects of Troy are more like blood dripping down Achilles' helmet, loss of impalement and stuff. A guy gets a spear through his face at one point and, you know, it's Achilles again. That guy will throw a spear at anyone for anything. All right, so I just wanted to do a little segment where I was highlighting some special things that didn't fit into any other category for each film. I'll start with the Odyssey. I think that having done a little bit of research on Nolan's thinking and the original Odyssey, these choices that he's made to create an allegory for modern day, I think are quite interesting. This metaphor for American disillusion maybe, or this abandonment of international law. It's quite an interesting idea. You know, Zeus's law basically being international law. And when we abandon it, we lose the structure and the safety that it might give us. You sort of don't know what you're throwing away. I think that was a really cool idea. And of course, shooting it on an IMAX and having it look so incredible, it's kind of unbeatable in that way. But I think the plot being driven by ethics it's kind of Greek in its own way. Troy's strengths, honestly, it's absolutely its fight choreography. The stunts in this and the combat and the sword fighting is right up there with some of the best kung fu movies. The characters have their own moves. Even a minor character like Ajax, he's got a couple of cool things he does with a hammer. And the fight scene between Achilles and Hector at the center of this film is one of the best one-on-one combat scenes that I've ever seen. It's so epic and it reveals so much about the characters. It's right up there with the lightsaber battle between Obi-Wan and Darth Maul, which I think when you put heaps and heaps of effort into the choreography, it pays off. Right, so you're going to be thinking, well, which is it, Josh? Which one do you prefer? And they're so different from each other. It would really be maybe a little bit mood dependent. That feels like a cop-out. But for me, and maybe this is partly fueled by nostalgia, I could see myself watching Troy more often in the future. Look, I'm not an authority on this, obviously. I just want to get a conversation going. So if there's points that you'd like to make, let's have the conversation in the comments. I promise I'll reply to it as much as I can. Let me know which horse you preferred. Let me know if you had a problem with how sexy Troy was, or if you thought Orlando Bloom was super convincing and great. I'd love to hear it. Thanks for watching.